Hi there, and welcome to the Somewhere Between Here and Healing podcast. I'm Viv, your host and fellow traveler on this journey of navigating life after growing up with a narcissistic parent. Together, we'll explore the messy, the funny, and the downright unbelievable stories of family, life, and self discovery. Please let it be known I am not a therapist nor claim to be an expert in any way. I am simply someone who's been through it, still figuring things out, and I'm here to share my story with you. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's get this thing started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I can't believe it has already been over a month since I launched this little project. When I started, I wasn't sure where it would go or how it would be received, but the feedback and support so far have been incredible. I've heard from so many of you who have said parts of my story have resonated deeply so far, and that means more to me than I can ever put into words. So thank you. I have to say, I'm genuinely surprised at how quickly I've received feedback and questions. It's been overwhelming in the best way possible, and it brings me so much joy to know this podcast is already connecting with so many of you. Because of that, I am dedicating this episode to a couple of listener questions. I'd love to make this a regular thing too. Perhaps a monthly Q&A or even sharing a listener's story anonymously or not, whatever the listener's preference. So if you have questions, thoughts, or experiences you want to share, please don't hesitate to email me at vivvance@gmail.com or leave a question in the comments on social media. I'd love to hear from you. I also just want to remind everyone again that I am in no way a professional. I'm just sharing my story and my perspective as someone who's lived and living through it all. So please take what resonates with you and know this is always a space of honesty and connection. No perfect answers, just real ones. With that, let's dive in. Question one: how did you realize your father was a narcissist or had narcissistic traits? This is such a great question, and honestly, it took me a long time to even put the pieces together. Growing up, I didn't know what a narcissist was. It is not a word that was in my vocabulary. I just knew something felt off. My father was a charming man, at least to everyone outside of our family, and to most of the people in our family. And people love him. But at home, it was walking on eggshells at times. He had this way of making everything about him, even if it wasn't. There were big moments, yes, and we'll deep dive into those in the later episodes. Things like explosive anger when things didn't go his way. But the smaller things were just as telling. For example, he would often offer to help with creative school projects, let's say like a science fair. But instead of helping, he would take over and do the entire thing himself. And of course, because he was naturally talented at so many things, the projects always came out great. I remember feeling so conflicted. On one hand, the project would be praised, of course, but on the other, it didn't feel like mine anymore. It was even as if my schoolwork had become a stage for him to perform on. Sometimes it seems almost silly to talk about those little moments like this, but this just is one example of many. And let me tell you, those little things, they add up. Now, like I mentioned, I never knew what a narcissist was until just a few years ago. I don't even remember where I first heard the word. I think it was a quote block that came up on social media. It was one of those moments that made me pause and reread it a few times. Something about the quote struck a chord, so much so that I started looking up related posts, looking for similar quotes, starting to listen to YouTube videos, and it pretty much snowballed from there. But even after my initial understanding of narcissism, it was a slow process to understand what was happening and why it was happening. The why part, I still don't fully understand and probably never will. There was absolutely a denial phase when I was first trying to wrap my head around all this. I mean, there's no way this is my life, my father, right? But the patterns that so many people were speaking about started to be really obvious for me as well. It was like seeing a puzzle literally come together. I could predict what would happen at family functions, holidays, in conversation, and especially when I would stand up for myself. And I'll tell you, it's been a unique process of realization. Only in the past couple of years do I feel like I started to truly get parts of this narcissistic situation, but I am still learning every day. And as I began to unpack this, I started connecting those narcissistic traits to childhood moments, like the science fair I mentioned before. It wasn't until later on that I realized these types of moments, and many, many others, were part of a larger pattern. He always had to have the upper hand. Then there was the blame and the shame. So much shame growing up. He often made me feel like nothing I did was enough. And when I tried to defend myself, that's when the gaslighting would start. Him gaslighting me was one of the biggest tells. I never knew that gaslighting was even a thing. I didn't know it was something that was happening to me until I did. More recently, the gaslighting got worse and it would become ever present even in text messages. And let me tell you, when you see it, not just hear it, and you can read it over and over, it's that much more obvious and rather shocking, really. I always say, once you start to see and understand these things, you just can't unsee them. For anyone trying to make sense of their own situation, I'd say trust your gut. If something feels wrong or makes you question your reality, it's worth exploring. Narcissistic relationships can be so confusing because the manipulation can often be subtle. But once you see it and you see the patterns, it becomes clearer. And remember, you're not alone, and understanding what's happening is the first step towards your healing. Question two: was it hard to go no contact with your parents? Okay, I know I haven't talked about this one in depth on the podcast for so many reasons, but I promise I will get there. So, the short answer: yes, it was and is incredibly hard. But for me, I felt it was also necessary. This wasn't a decision I ever thought I would be faced with, nor was it one I made lightly. In fact, I didn't even know that it could happen until I was in that specific moment and space and time. It was a culmination of years and years and years of emotional turmoil, narcissistic abuse, shaming, gaslighting, and a complete lack of accountability. It was the result of countless moments that left me questioning my worth, my sanity, and my ability to break free from the cycles of harm. When I realized I had to stop those patterns, it was heart shattering to say the least. To this day, I'm sick over it. There's a heaviness that lingers because cutting ties with your own family feels like ripping out a piece of yourself. And the guilt is real and it is rough. Even when I know logically that going low to no contact was the healthiest choice at the time, there's still a relentless voice in my head that whispers, but they are your parents. And then, of course, society piles on with its reminders: family is family, and they did the best they could. But here's what I've come to realize: love isn't supposed to hurt like that. And we need to stop with the, oh, just let it go, you know how they are, be the bigger person narrative. It's not that simple. For me, I knew putting my foot down was the only way to end these patterns and cycles that had shaped and were shaping so much of my life. If I didn't start saying no then, I might never have. I couldn't let my children grow up witnessing or feeling the same patterns of toxicity. I had to stand up, not just for myself, but for my family. It stops with me. Even so, the process hasn't been easy. There's been days, weeks, months of back and forth feelings, moments where I was pulled back in just when I thought I'd finally created a little distance. It feels like a toxic dance I can't quite step out of. And yet, despite the heartbreak and all the lingering doubts, I can say this: I have a peace now that I never had before. Not the sort of calm peace I ever imagined, but it is a peace of some sort in its own way. Going no contact is not easy. It's painful, it's messy, and it's extremely lonely at times. It does often come with so many other repercussions, with loss, judgment. But for me, it was necessary for me to start healing. We'll get into more details in another episode when I'm ready, like I mentioned, but I'll leave you with this. I am in no way suggesting that any of you, dear listeners, should and need to go no contact. I am merely saying that sometimes protecting yourself means making decisions that hurt immensely in the short term, but just may save parts of you in the long run. Question 3: what do you say to people who don't understand what it's like to have a narcissistic parent or person in their life? This one hits so close to home because honestly, it's one of those things that's so hard to explain if you haven't experienced it or even realize it's happening or want to see or understand it. Narcissistic abuse is insidious, subtle, and often invisible to outsiders. My father, for example, seems like a great guy on the surface to so many. Funny, charming, successful, talented. People love him. And it was damn near impossible for them to reconcile that image with any of the stories I would share. I'd get comments like, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" Or, "But he's such a nice guy," and so on. When I did try to explain, it sometimes felt like the words coming out of my mouth sounded silly, or the stories didn't quite land the way I meant them to. And that's a tough battle because so many of these stories are just on the surface. They're the first layer of a much deeper, more complex foundation, stories upon stories that build and build over years. That's why, in most cases, I actually don't talk about it much with people who can't relate on some level. I've learned it's not my job to convince anyone of my truth or make them understand what it's like. And honestly, that's okay. I don't need their validation. I have my own. Instead, I choose to open up to the people who do get it or do want to understand, the ones who have lived it, are living it. Because when you know, you know. There's this unspoken understanding, and it's such a relief not to have to explain and over explain every detail. For those who genuinely want to understand, though, I try to break it down as simply as I can. Imagine growing up with someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally, but instead, they criticize and manipulate you. They make you doubt your own memories, your feelings, even your reality, because they've convinced you they know better. And that just doesn't have to apply to a narcissistic parent. It could be a friend, a spouse, a coworker. It's not always easy for people to grasp this because honestly, some of the things that have happened to me don't feel real sometimes, as I'm sure many of you can relate. Sometimes they feel like stories straight out of a movie. But for those who take the time to listen and to try to understand, it's often a meaningful conversation and a meaningful connection. Now, thankfully, I haven't had to deal with a narcissistic partner. I've been with my husband since high school, and he's the furthest thing from that. But I have encountered other narcissists along the way of life, including a highly toxic boss that I worked under for 17 years. That being said, I can only imagine how much more devastating it must be to live with a narcissistic spouse or partner. At the end of the day, I just have to remind myself and you all that I've made it through this and so can you. Question 4. What has your healing journey taught you? Wow, this is such a beautiful question and a weighted one. There's so much. Healing has been a messy, complicated process, but one thing I've learned is that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. Growing up, I was made to feel small and like my voice didn't matter. But stepping away from that environment has shown me just how resilient I am. I've also learned that it's okay to prioritize myself. For so long, I put everyone else's needs above my own because that's what I was conditioned to do. That's what the quote right thing to do is, right? But healing has taught me that self care isn't selfish, it's necessary. Whether it's setting boundaries, saying no, or just taking time to do something that brings me joy, I've realized I deserve those things. And you do too. And honestly, learning to say no, however hard, has been life changing. It's such a simple word, right? No. But for me, and I'm sure for many of you, it feels impossible. Now I realize it's okay to set rules for my life, to listen to my mind and body, to step back from the things that make me feel uneasy or drained, or to say no. Another thing I've started doing recently is leaning into joy. I keep talking about joy. But even when it feels silly or small, I lean into that joy. Sometimes it's as simple as dancing in my kitchen to an 80s song, or jumping into the pool, or spending time on a creative project that just lights me up, big or small. I have been writing and writing, and I'm learning that these types of self care moments aren't frivolous. They're the little moments that make life meaningful and happy. One of the biggest lessons in healing has been giving myself permission to feel, really feel. Whether it's joy, grief, anger, or the weird mix of emotions that healing often stirs up. In the past, I would try to numb everything or keep it bottled up and packed away. But now I'm slowly allowing myself to sit with those feelings, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. It's not always easy, but it's part of the process. Lastly, I'm learning to embrace the messy parts of my story. For years, I tried to push all that down, just like I do with emotions, to pretend the messy bits weren't that bad. But owning my truth, even the painful, messy parts, has been freeing. It's helping me see that my past doesn't define me. It's just one part of who I am. And that's that. Those are just a few of the questions I had on the docket today. To everyone who submitted these, thank you. Your curiosity and connection mean the world to me. And to anyone listening who's on their own journey, I hope this episode reminds you you are not alone. We are all figuring it out together, one step at a time. And before I wrap up, I want to remind you to please send in your own questions or stories. I'd love to feature them in future episodes and help in any way I can. And if today's episode resonated with you, please feel free to share it with someone who might also need to hear it. As always, thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember, you're doing great. Viv. Thank you for listening and spending time with me today. I appreciate you all so much. If you haven't already, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and follow me on social media. Your support means the world. Plus, it really helps a podcast grow and reach more people like us. And don't forget, I'd love to hear from you. Send me your questions, share your story, or just drop by to say hello at vivvance@gmail.com. Until next time, remember, healing isn't linear, Life can be unpredictable, but you are never alone in this journey. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.